Okay, hi. Come help me write my honors final with me. I'm a 20-year-old D1 athlete majoring in finance and accounting who has somehow ended up spending arguably too much time thinking about Virginia Woolf. This video is about performance, about the version of yourself you put on for other people, which is funny because I introduced myself by my sport and my major before I said anything else. So, alright, let's start with Virginia Woolf. But first, let's look at these clips of me pretending to work on my honors project. Oh yeah, cool angles, yep, totally writing there, yeah, very academic. Alright, sorry, let's start the project now. Virginia Woolf's 1924 short story, The New Dress, follows a woman named Mabel to a party hosted by Clarissa Dalloway. That's essentially the entire plot. I mean, she arrives, she quietly suffers and leaves, but the in-between is where Woolf does extraordinary. Mabel had a custom dress made for this party, not fashionable but original, pulling an old Paris fashion book from her mother's era and thinks, why not be yourself? Why not be modest and old-fashioned and very charming, says Woolf. Mabel, as a result, confides in the identity of her dress, a performance she's only rehearsed in solitude. And for a moment, it works. Standing in the workroom, looking at her finished reflection, Mabel sees the core of herself, the soul of herself. She feels, briefly, like, well, herself. Naturally, this all had to come crashing down as she enters the room and is convinced, undoubtedly so, that everyone is thinking, what is Mabel wearing? What fright she looks. Mabel's self-consciousness skyrockets from there, in her imagining everyone as flies trying to crawl out of a saucer of milk. Woolf writes she could not see them like that, not other people. She saw herself like that, a fly while everyone else is a dragonfly, a butterfly, something luminous and free. By the end of the story, Mabel says goodnight, tells her host she's had a wonderful time, and walks out the door. Her final words to herself, lies, lies, lies. Woolf's most unsettling insight is that the dressmaker's workroom and the party aren't two different experiences. They're the same experience at different intensities. Mabel constructs herself, page by page, in private, alone, and still cannot escape the feeling of being watched and found wanting. This gaze, Woolf suggests, isn't something imposed from outside. It has already been internalized so completely that Mabel carries it with her into every room. The dress was never really about the party. It was about the fact that Mabel has never, not once, been able to see herself outside of the view of others. Woolf doesn't tell us how we got there, and that's where Betty Friedan comes in. Writing in 1963, nearly 4 decades after The New Dress, Betty Friedan identified what she called the problem that has no name. A pervasive dissatisfaction spreading through American women that no one had language for, that experts dismissed. The only remaining thought being, is this all to life? What made the problem so difficult to name, Friedan argues, is precisely what made it so total. The chains binding women are chains in her own mind and spirit. They are the chains made up of ideas and misinterpreted facts, of incomplete truths and unreal voices. They are not easily seen and not easily shaken off. Looking through this lens shows Mabel is not simply a victim of others' cruelty. She's a victim of a structure so thoroughly absorbed that it's accepted as reality. One of the best women Friedan interviewed says it best. I'm a server of food and a putter on of pants and a bed maker. Somebody who can be called on when you want something. But who am I? She isn't asking a rhetorical. She genuinely doesn't know. The role has been so total, the performance so sustained, that their self underneath becomes inaccessible. Friedan's argument extends Woolf in a crucial direction. Mabel's problem is not a personal failing or a fragile temperament. It's the logical outcome of a culture that has spent decades telling women that their only legitimate identity is one defined in relation to other people. Friedan described millions of women living their lives, as she put, in the image of those pretty pictures of the American suburban housewife, not as themselves, but as a version of themselves constructed for public consumption. The performance was the point. Gloria Steinem digs one layer deeper, asking not just what the performance does to women, but who benefits from it remaining in place. Her argument is direct. The characteristics of the powerful are always deemed superior to the characteristics of the powerless. And critically, logic has nothing to do with it. The performance of femininity, of pleasantness, of self-erasure, of living for the approval of others, is not natural. It is not biological. It is a story told by those with the power to tell it, repeated until it feels like instinct. What makes Steinem's contribution so important is that she refuses to let the performance be understood as a personal problem. It is a political one, and political problems have political architects. Taken together, Woolf, Friedan, and Steinem map the same terrain from three different layers. Woolf shows what it feels like from the first person, the fly in the saucer, the mirrors everywhere, the lies on the way out the door. We then zoom out to Friedan, who shows the architecture, the cultural machinery that produces women who don't know who they are past wife and mom. And finally, Steinem, who refuses to let the systems be understood as an ancient of culture or an oversight of history. Which brings us to 2026. As the machinery didn't dismantle itself, it was just rebranded. But how? The story Friedan tells about the 1950s housewives is one about a specific historical movement, a specific image. It's tempting to read it as resolved. Women entered the workforce, the feminist movement happened, and the mystique was named and therefore weakened. But Steinem's insight warns us against that comfort. The system doesn't disappear, it adapts. What social media introduced was not liberation from the performance, but a new theater for it. Now, performance wasn't demanded of a woman specifically, rather it was demanded of everyone. Men, women, anyone with a profile and an audience. The system Friedan identified as specific to mid-century American womanhood was now democratized. The platform, any platform really, has one implicit demand. Be legible, be consistent, be recognizable enough that people know what they're getting when they return to you. In other words, be a brand. The moment you have a profile, you have an audience. The moment you have an audience, you have a consistency problem. And the moment you have a consistency problem, you are no longer simply living. You are producing a version of yourself for consumption. That's not self-expression, that's brand management, meaning you are always oriented outwards, towards the audience, before you have even said anything. The dominant aesthetic of the last decade of online content is organized around the performance of authenticity. Unfiltered morning get-readies with me, day in the lives of any occupation, the list goes on. Rawness itself has been aestheticized, packaged, and monetized. Because the performance of not performing is still a performance, the realest version of yourself that you post is still a version you selected, framed, and chose to make public. Consider what this produces in the audience just as much as the performer. When a writer documents their daily routine, the notebooks, the morning pages, the carefully arranged desk, they are not simply sharing a life. They are producing an aesthetic of a life, and that aesthetic is entirely consumable, entirely replicable, without any of the substance beneath it. A viewer can buy the same notebooks, adopt the same morning routine, frame the same window light, and perform being a writer without ever sitting down to do the actual, unglamorous, invisible work of writing. The platform cannot distinguish between the two. It rewards the image of these things as readily as the thing itself. The platform cannot distinguish between the two. It rewards the image of the things as readily as the thing itself. What gets lost in that exchange is precisely what cannot be photographed. The effort, the failure, the private, unglamorous hours that actually constitute an identity. Just like those pretty pictures of the suburban housewives that Friedan described. And one last thought. The people most consumed by an actual passion rarely have time to perform it. The writer who is truly writing is not documenting their morning routine. They're writing. The person genuinely out in the wilderness is not curating gear shots, they're hiking. The platform makes them effectively invisible. What gets amplified instead is the person most oriented towards being watched, which means what we are actually consuming, most of the time, is not passion, but the aesthetic of passion, not the thing, but the image of the thing. The Arc'teryx jacket photographed against the rain light and the empty moleskin notebook. The person quietly doing the work for years with no audience reads as less authentic than the person who has documented every step of a journey they may have barely begun. If you don't post about it, the platform has no record of it. And in the 21st century logic, having no record of it means it didn't happen. We've outsourced the proof of our lives to an audience, which is Mabel's problem exactly. She could not feel real without the validation of the room, except now the room is infinite, and the mirror is now carried in our pockets. The question Frieden's housewives asked in 1963, at the end of the day of performing a role she hadn't chosen, is no longer specific to women trapped in domestic life. It has become the defining question of anyone who has grown up with a screen. The problem that had no name found a bigger host.
It isn't to say that
The performance didn't end, it scaled. And what scaled with it is the same fundamental disorientation Mabel felt walking out of that party. The gap between who you are and who you have learned to be for other people. The dress changed, the mirror didn't. We talk about authenticity like it's a solution. Like if we could just be real enough, honest enough, unfiltered enough, we'd find something solid underneath. But if the performance of authenticity, oh my fucking god, I can't speak. But if the performance of authenticity, but if the performance of authenticity is still performance, if the realest version of yourself you can access has already been shaped by an audience you've been imagining since you were old enough to hold a camera, then what exactly are we getting back to? Alright, and now we arrive at the final dramatic question. It's a two-parter. First part being, who are you when you're not performing? And the second, arguably more dramatic part is, do you even know?